Hello and welcome to The Pouch, the reheated leftover KFC of podcasts that aims to help the average Aussie try and make sense of their current political environment. I'm Greg, parks and movies are overrated anyway, Savage.
And I'm Jake. I'd like 200 million to stay right where I am, Far Wharton. On today's episode, we talk friends with benefits, unemployment ministers, and rad renewables.
And Jake, while we're snug as a bug in this proverbial rug, I want to know about our relationship with China. Now, not too much of a deep dive. I think last week in our description for our episode, I said a deep dive. Well, more of a shallow wade into our relationship with China. There's a few things going on this week that I'd just like to tickle.
Well, what I thought we might discuss this week is whether we can survive without China.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, the answer is, I don't know. Or on 1.5 speed.
Woo! Jake, you might talk a bit funny this week. And I presume it's not because you were boasting about all of your freedoms up there in North Queensland to a New South Welshman who then clocked you in the jaw. I presume it's a little more nuanced than that. What's happening with your jaw?
Well, as listeners of the show know, I do engage in mixed martial arts, and unfortunately, while on my last training session of mixed martial arts, or as I like to call intense hugging, I hugged a little too hard and dislocated my jaw.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, I admire your commitment. But if the episode is only 10 minutes long this week, everyone will know why, and everyone will be more grateful for it. Jake, a huge week this week. I mean, a lot of political shows have stopped, saying that politics is over for now. We're just going to stop. Shows like The Party Room and all that sort of stuff. But not us, Jake. We kept plowing through. We've plowed through the bushfires. We've plowed through the floods and the other things that have happened, and we plowed through coronavirus every gosh darn week. And every week is getting bigger now, and I'm glad about that.
Yeah. Politics is coming back.
Now, Queensland...
making a vengeance.
Queensland wants to... This is my understanding of what's happening. Queensland want to buy Virgin.
Well, they want to buy a stake in Virgin,
right.
Which, by the way, steak...
They want to buy a few wings.
If you don't have a broken jaw.
They want to buy a few wings, do they? So tell me what's happening. What is this? What is this little story here?
Look, it's a little bit weird and interesting, but essentially, the Queensland government have put in a bid for a portion of the troubled airline Virgin Airlines that is asking for essentially a public fundraising at the moment, and I believe next week they're due to assess all of the bids that were taking place. I think at this stage there's about 12 to 15 bids that have taken place, and Queensland government's bid, because of course Queensland hosts a large portion of the Virgin administrative people. The offices associated with Virgin are located here in Queensland. Yeah. We have, the state of Queensland has essentially made a bid for a stake in the airline of $200 million, and it has not. I mean, Virgin Airlines has appeared to have taken the bid seriously, and Queensland said essentially it can take many forms. It can be either a loan, it can be a direct stake in equity, or it can be something else. They're open to other things. But it won't be. It certainly won't be the full thing that will take it forward. But a number of particularly federal Liberal and National Party MPs have criticised the Queensland government for taking a stake in it. Peter Dutton, or P Duddy as we affectionately call him on our show, he said that the Queensland government should stick to something else. And it's just one of those really interesting. In fact, Peter Dutton referred to the Queensland government as quote, corrupt. He said,
"Yeah, what's happening there? Why does he say they're corrupt?"
I see. This is the interesting thing here. I don't understand how let's have a qualifier here. If you're going to say that the Queensland government is corrupt, how about you qualify it? How about you provide evidence for what it is that you're stating that they are corrupt for? Yeah. But he didn't say that. No. He just said they're corrupt and they should not be trying to make a bid. And look, $200 million in terms of an airline that has around $6 billion in debt is really a drop in the ocean. But it is not. It's not $200 million as an offer to take over the entire company and all of its debts, etc. It is a stake in the company. Yeah. It is saying, hey, we are here to show that Queensland is serious about the stake that Virgin has in Queensland. The number of employees that it has in that organisation, and we feel serious about keeping it here.
Yeah, because we announced on the show, you heard it here first, that a lot of commentators were saying that it was going to be fine, that Virgin was going to be bought out, that this is all a bit of a smoke screen. Where are we with that? Do we know? Is there a buyer?
Well, there's at this stage there are about 12 to 15 bids, and next week we will start to hear what which of those bids, what of those number of bids are going to be accepted and taken forward.
All right, well, we will keep you updated with that hard-hitting story.
Very hard-hitting.
Yes, in these turbulent times.
Hey,
ba-dum-ching. Now. Last week on the show, Jake, we kind of missed a story, right? I mean, let's not beat around the bush here. We had Jacinda Ardern take part in a video conference, and we didn't chat about that too much, but that's okay because we never claim to be anything other than what we are.
Exactly.
And so we're going to backtrack a little bit. We're going to explore this story when Jacinda was here.
Yep.
She wants, I like the title here. You've got Becoming Friends with Benefits with New Zealand.
Yep.
And so what happened? So this is all about the trans-tasman bubble. Now, New Zealand,
they say, yes.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I hate that title. We need a vastly better title.
I like it.
Do you?
Okay. Well, they're all about the bubble at the moment in New Zealand. I know that because I have family over there. Hello, family over there. And
they said hi, by the way.
Yeah, I can hear them. I can hear them. That's how close we are. That's how big the bubble is. I was chatting with them the other day, and they were saying that they're all about the bubble. They have a social bubble, so you have to qualify people who are in your bubble, and you go and you can do shopping for those people. You can do tasks for those people. Those are the people in your bubble while they were in that enormously successful lockdown over the last few months. Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, really, they did a really great job. I don't know if they've still got 0 cases, but I know that they had a couple of days where they had 0 cases, which is just tremendous. So, kudos to them. And they're all about the bubble. And now they've brought the bubble to us.
Yeah, well, I suppose
we're bringing the bubble to them.
I think we're proposing
Who's bringing the
to
bubble,
merge.
Jake?
I think we're going to merge our bubbles. We've got a great little bubble here, and they've got a great little bubble there. I think we're going to merge those bubbles and create a trans-tasman.
Okay.
A trans-tasman bubble. I'm still not happy with it. I think it needs to be a shared equity bubble.
What about more of a dome? What about a dome?
A dome?
The trans-tasman dome.
Okay. I mean, sure. Let's work on it. Let's put that up on the whiteboard of bad ideas as
it's behind you.
An example of bad ideas.
I can see it behind you. Okay, let's get into it. So as Australia and New Zealand's coronavirus cases dwindle, plans are afoot.
Yes, and those plans include creating a, quote, trans-tasman, but otherwise known as a trans-Tasman bubble that would allow free travel between the two countries. So, yes, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is expected to flesh out the plan through that National Cabinet meeting that she now has with Australian leaders via video call. Now, although the idea is still in its very, very early stages, the prospect of being allowed to visit our Kiwi cousins when overseas travel seems near impossible has come as a welcome surprise. I think, as you were alluding, both to our trans-Tasman neighbours in I almost said Tasmania, but it's New Zealand. But also to Australians as well, because we want the hell out of here as well.
Well, we do. I suppose the thing, it's all about tourism, isn't it? It's all and
well, that's part of it. Yeah, I definitely think so. And it seems. Yes, well, definitely we've got a little bit of that going on. But did you know, in terms of the actual travel, Australians make up nearly 40% of international travel arrivals to New Zealand, spending more than any other country, including China.
What?
How about that?
What? A country that's not dependent on China? That's insane.
Well, for travel anyway. But interestingly enough, in terms of what we in Australia would get in return, tourism is only
because heaven forbid we do something nice for a country with.
Yeah,
what's in it for us?
We live near.
Well, that's great, mate.
It seems that
what's in the bubble for us?
New Zealanders only make up about 15% of Australia's. New Zealanders only make up about 15% of Australia's international visitors. But exactly, and that's it. While it is worth billions,
to be fair, even if they all came over at the same time, it'd probably only be 20%.
Exactly.
Anyway,
yeah. We can fit them all in Queensland. We can fit them all in in Brisbane,
Jake.
So yes, but interestingly enough, Prime Minister Scott Morrison last month, of course, flagged that, quote, if there were any country in the world with whom we can reconnect with first,
it's Fiji.
Undoubtedly, that's Fiji. Yeah, New Zealand.
Oh,
yeah,
close. Best to stick with the story. Yeah, I know, because I was reading, and it's not something that I really thought about, right? That they are going to have to expand it to include the islands, because it doesn't actually include a lot of those Pacific islands.
Enough, the Pacific Islands, or the PIs, to acronymise it.
As no one calls it.
As no one calls it. They have had very few cases of coronavirus as well.
Yes. Well, that makes sense, because they're islands.
Yeah, exactly. But they're in the Pacific, so we can't really call it a trans-tasman bubble if it includes the Pacific.
Is that not? In the Tasman?
We could call it the trans-Tasman and Pacific bubble,
right?
But it just it doesn't have so much of a ring.
I like it better, actually.
Trans-Tasman and Pacific, or how about the
only because it forces you to say it. Okay, so we want this to happen, right? This is a symbiotic relationship that we would have with New Zealand, and if I read it correctly, they said as soon as there was any sort of outbreak in either country, it's off. We're breaking off the date.
Well, I mean, that's probably speculative. I think invariably this is not going to happen immediately. It's not going to happen immediately anyway. It's going to still be months away. New Zealand would probably be waiting for Victoria's cases to reach zero, for Australia's cases to reach zero, before they were willing to open up the trans-Tasman bubble, as it were.
Okay.
So by that stage, we will effectively have, for want of a better term, cured the virus. But either way, it's going to flare up. Like, we're going to have these little second waves. The main purpose of the lockdowns was really to allow time for our hospitals to, be ready to accept cases of coronavirus, as well as to restrict the number of people coming into contact with each other and spreading it wildly. Now, our hospitals are, essentially ready. They're gagging for it. They would love a couple of coronavirus cases about now. Fairly certain that they won't. They won't at all be hoping for that.
We do have a comment, Jake. We do have a comment. Somebody asked, "What is symbiotic?" Then they put Greggles after it. That's not.
By the way,
right.
Commenter,
I don't.
Greg does not at all enjoy the term Greggles. I have purposely removed it from my vernacular. He just does not like Greggles at all.
Let's stick with Greg later. All right, what is symbiotic, Jake? Go. You're the man with the words.
Well, symbiosis is essentially a term
not symbiosis,
where
Jake, symbiotic.
Well, it's the same thing. So essentially, you give and take in equal amounts. That's it. It just means
like 50-50?
Whatever
it is.
Does
it have to be 50-50?
Well, yeah. It's used in terms of parasites. So you've got symbiotic parasites.
All right.
They give you some form of benefit, and they take some form of benefit in order to keep them alive. The prime example, Greg, is the human hookworm, which was discovered in the tribes of Africa.
All right, this is an Australian news and politics podcast, not not Word of the Day podcast. This is an Australian news and politics podcast. We tackle Australian news and politics.
Not so seriously.
Nailed it. Yes, but you can leave a comment. We can discuss that on today's show. And our next story has to do with unemployment in Australia, which is fascinating. I loved this article because it put a bit of a different spin on the whole unemployment situation here in Australia. I've got to say that while I was watching the news last night and they brought up the figures, I was a bit shocked at how low they were. So I'm glad that... I'm glad that I had a reason to read a news article explaining to me why that was. So, Jake, talk us through it. Why do we need an unemployment minister?
Well, I mean,
a minister for unemployment, and where do I apply?
That was me, exactly. That was me waxing lyrically in that, we are going to have essentially what amounts to almost 10% of our adult population or, of worker age population unemployed by the end of the coronavirus. It's as expected by the Reserve Bank of Australia. And, hey, 10% of a population of a country of essentially voting age, you would expect that they would get their own minister. I mean, that's 10 whole %.
They're underrepresented, aren't they?
Yeah. Exactly, they are.
All right.
But yes, Australia has suffered its largest single month jump in unemployment on record in April, and there is more pain to come, it seems. The ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics figures, that was hard to say around the jaw. Figures
if you need me to help out, I can help out. So
No, that's all right. Released earlier this week showed that Australia's unemployment rate jumped from 5.2% to 6.2% in April.
Yes.
And like you, Greg, when I saw 6.2%,
I was aghast.
I was aghast as well. And the Reserve Bank of Australia is saying we're going to see 10%. The Grattan Institute is saying we're going to see between 8 and 10%. The Australia Institute is saying we're going to see between 8 and 10%. And
nonsense.
Yet we're only seeing
6.2%. Tell me what's happening, Jake. Surely there's two systems at play here.
Well, essentially, as although many economists had expected the jobless rate, as I said, to soar above 8%, most believe that the figures don't tell the full picture. The unexpectedly low unemployment rate is the product of a lower, quote, participation rate.
Yes.
The participation rate essentially refers to the percentage of all working age Australians who are either employed or looking for work, referred to as the labour force. And in April, that group fell by 2.4 percentage points to 63.5%. Yeah. But essentially, we have roughly 600,000 people freshly out of work, with a large portion of those being supported by the JobKeeper program who are technically not looking for work and thus not unemployed. We've had a cessation as well of the job seeker mutual obligations requirement where on this, people on this program do not actually need to turn up to interviews and they don't need to turn up to the jobs that they've received from, say, unemployment institutions. Because essentially not all of these people are actually technically unemployed, the official unemployment figure, while the unofficial unemployment figure might actually be sitting at about 10%, the official unemployment figure is sitting at roughly 6.2. So, hey, where would we be without JobKeeper? We would be at around that 10% mark. So it's interesting.
And so many people have been affected by this, and I suppose we've made a little bit of lightheartedness of it, but it is a very serious thing, and it's a very sad thing at the moment for a lot of people. And I know as well that it sort of it affects the women in the job force, more negatively than the men, in the sense that it's the sort of the casual jobs, it's the hospitality industries that have been really, really impacted by those job losses. And so women are being really negatively affected by this situation as well. So I think that, on the one hand, it's great that we've had this JobKeeper. That's such a great initiative. I've spoken to a few people who run businesses, and they were really devastated because they were new businesses, so they couldn't have casuals on JobKeeper because they hadn't been around for the 12 months that they needed to be around for. So that was really interesting as well. So new businesses, women, all still being really negatively affected by what's happening with coronavirus. And I'd be curious to see what sort of percentage of that 600,000 make up that.
Women.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's devastating for those people. I think the fact, however, that it is still so low is a testament to JobKeeper working. I'd be interested to know what Labor were going to do. What were their options in terms of bringing in something that would help casuals? I know that they were having a pretty big casual push at one stage.
Yeah. The other part of this is the underrepresented, workforce who are underemployed, and that's this is a big thing. The people who are either slightly disengaged or would like more hours to work. This growing population of people are often suffering as well. Essentially, you are classified as employed if you work 1 hour a week.
Yeah.
So there is this group of people who effectively, I'm going to say that they want to work more hours. They want greater engagement with the economy, with the workforce, but are not there. So to answer your question directly. Labor and in fact the Greens and a few of the other independents and minor parties have been calling this week for an expansion of the JobKeeper program to more casual workers and for people who are over on 457 visas, which is the immigration program, and other workers who have come internationally to work here and who are unable to essentially get back. The interesting thing here is that we did through the week see a lot of the backbencher a lot of the backbencher MPs saying we've got to end JobKeeper now, and we need to re-engage the job seeker mutual obligation requirements as soon as humanly possible. And we've actually seen Josh Frydenberg announce this week as part of the announcement of the loss of jobs. He also announced that the budget will be pushed back.
Coughs.
In between coughs, exactly. He announced that budget will be pushed back to around October. And, that is, I think around October, we're going to see some pretty grim figures. And if it hasn't already happened by then, I would see very quickly, I would imagine that we would see very quickly the cessation of the JobKeeper program.
Yeah.
And again, that job seeker mutual obligation requirement.
Because that's what the talk has been all this week, hasn't it? It's been all about, when's it going to end, rather than sort of keeping it on or adding to it or changing it for other casual workers or anything like that. Yeah, so very unfortunate. However, we do have quite low figures, I guess, considering how potentially bad it could have been. It'd be interesting to see the debates that come out of that. Everyone with their 20/20 hindsight will be able to critique what's going on at the moment, and
they'll be doing it for decades.
Yeah.
By and large,
I would say centuries.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. We're
they'll be
easily
using
moving
this
into
as
millennium.
Why not? Why not? Let's just throw in other words. But at periods of time. Yeah, people are going to be critiquing this for years because, by and large, it's very hard to fault the way that the Australian government has reacted to the coronavirus, threat essentially coming into Australia. Sure, there's nuance here and there's nuance there, but invariably it will be very hard for anyone to essentially say this was completely the wrong thing to do, that there were specific missteps.
Yeah.
There's always that, the criticism that we raise every time, which is, potentially we should have had an earlier stimulus plan. But, you look at that and you say, hey, had we had an earlier stimulus plan, there is every chance that we wouldn't have had the money to react as we did to keep people employed while they were essentially not working.
Yeah. Like I've said from the start, certainly don't envy those people who are making those decisions. It's very, very tough decisions, a lot of information to take in, a lot of things to consider. And we have a lot of evidence to suggest, I think, that they're really doing this in the best interest of the nation. So, whether they're doing the best job or not, it'd be up for us to decide, I guess, in the future. But yeah, look, I feel confident at the moment. That's just me. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who feel differently. However, while we're on the topic of the road to recovery, the road out of this nonsense, the RBA wants Australia's resurgence to look at renewables. Why does the Reserve Bank get a say in this? Why do we listen to these people, Jake?
I think the way that you ask the question is rude.
Very profound.
No, I'm just kidding. I think the way that you ask the question is absolutely. It was actually extremely well structured. It was a great question, which, by the way, Greg, is the only type of question that you ask. So
you can tell who runs this podcast.
Yes, thank you, boss. So the reason why the RBA gets a say in this, and they don't really get a say in what the Australian government actually does. While they are the central bank of Australia, and while they do control and contribute and manage Australia's debt, per se, internationally, they don't necessarily get to have a say in policy. What they can do, though, is make recommendations based on, best evidence, best practice, international strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And what they have been concerned with pretty well since 2008 is the fact that there is very little subsidization and investment in sectors outside of mining in Australia. And so as a consequence, they are saying, guys, you are really putting all of your eggs in this basket that probably has a shelf life of 1 decade, maybe 2 decades, probably not 3 decades. So, in terms of your long-term strategic investments, you need to diversify, and you need to diversify quickly.
Yeah, well, we've got a situation happening with that, and we're going to get into that a little bit more with the China situation. The fact that they've have decided to stop a little bit of trade with us over the last week, which was an interesting move, interesting timing on that one. But it does highlight the fact that we are particularly dependent on China. Not that we needed much highlighting to be done on that, but it does highlight that fact. So this idea that we go, okay, how can we get out of this mess in the future? Maybe we're in a little bit of a spot at the moment, but how do we gradually wean ourselves off of China's firm grasp?
Well, I'm going to tell you this interesting story, and this is
a parable.
I wouldn't say it's a parable. It's more of a soliloquy.
Should I get comfortable?
More of a soliloquy. Actually, yes, it would be great if you. It is a soliloquy. So yes, we were. I'll take you back to the land of 2012, when the Imaginary Friends show, which was the podcast that we used to do together, was in its early days, and we interviewed a gentleman whew I remember his face very well because I've seen him at a number of completely unrelated conferences since. But I wish I could remember his name. Anyway, he essentially told us that he told us the story of, so it's a story within a story, getting very merry, very
like
meta,
Inception,
rather.
Jake.
It is. He told us the story of a scientist in ANU, Australia's National University, who had created the most efficient solar cells in the world. They were the most efficient cells at converting sunlight into energy. And when that scientist went to the Australian government and said, Australian government, I have the most efficient solar cells in the world, and I want to manufacture them in Australia. I want to put them on Australian roofs. The Australian government said, what?
What a ruse.
No. What a ruse, exactly. And essentially, no, the Australian government said at that time no, and as a consequence, the individual the scientist tried to create some manufacturing opportunities in Australia, and ended up being completely unable to do so, unable to fund his industrialization project, and went to China.
Right.
And began manufacturing the cells over there. Lived happily ever after, and he's probably making billions of dollars now, making those solar cells and exporting them back to Australia. But
so just like any good story, Jake, there's a moral. There's a moral hiding in there. Well,
Yes.
Is that moral that where this is like, even if we went to renewables now, it's like too little too late situation? Is it are we can we play catch up with this? Should we be listening to the Reserve Bank? And why don't we just grow hemp?
Great question. All great questions except for the hemp question.
Is that not a good question?
No, that was a great question. Actually, we should absolutely be growing hemp.
I'll put it in the not good questions list.
Put it up on the whiteboard of bad ideas. So the Reserve Bank has essentially said we need to diversify outside of outside of mining. We need to right now renewable energy is surging to a total of 5% of non-mining business investment across Australia, and we are now, as I suggested in the outset of this story, we have all of our eggs in one basket, which is mining, and that is invariably going to decline over the coming, particularly in terms of coal, brown coal, etc. That is going to decrease significantly over the next few years. So if we can invest in renewables, give the renewables industry a bit of assurance that Australia is serious about committing to renewable targets. We're serious about subsidising the renewable industry over, say, the oil industry or the coal industry or the mining industry, et cetera, other industries. Then they will get the signal that Australia is in this for the long term. And we're in this essentially to make good on strategic long-term investments.
Yeah, it would certainly be a silver lining, wouldn't it, to this whole situation? The idea of going, okay, what does our exit strategy look like, and how do we incorporate a whole bunch of renewables into that? It sounds like common sense.
Yeah. It would put instead of a silver lining, it would put a photovoltaic
nice.
lining.
Yes. I see what you did there. I
Thank
think.
you.
I don't know. You'll have to draw me a diagram later on. Jake, this week we received an email from a listener.
We did.
From Julian McGregor. He said, "Love the pods, lad. You fill a gaping chasm in Australia's political coverage landscape." Well, that is, I don't know what that, what, hyperbole? Hyperbole? We're going to read your stuff on the show anyway. It's not like we get flooded with emails. You don't have to get too cozy with us. You can just say, boys, No, that's very lovely of you, Julian. Question for you to discuss next show, which is this one, as I know Jake is excited about getting back to the gym. Yes, we all know that Jake's getting excited about the gym. It was about 40 minutes of last week's episode. Do you think martial arts... It's not true. That's not true. We're all rooting for you. Do you think martial arts gyms should be considered differently than regular treadmill and dumbbell gyms? I like that. I go to a treadmill and dumbbell gym. The consideration being the likelihood of virus transmission when sparring, pad holding, etc. I too love martial arts classes, but have to acknowledge it's not really a gym, as Scott Morrison probably is meaning when he says the word. Jake. Is sparring good?
I mean, yes is the short answer. As I opined in the opening of the podcast today, it's great fun until you dislocate your jaw. I didn't really dislocate my jaw doing that. I'm pretty sure I was just yawning intensely.
Anyway. So, okay, well, tell us what do you? I presume my guess is that it would be treated differently because you have a lot more contact. Yeah, you have physical contact with someone. In an actual gym. You can sort of stay away from people, and they can probably even control how many people they could have in there. I don't know how it all works, but yeah, martial arts. I mean, you're looking at getting on top of some people, Jake. In some regards,
you're going to breathe on each other. You're going to sweat on each other. Potentially, somebody nicks an eyebrow or an ear. You're going to be bleeding on each other. Invariably, I completely agree with Julian's premise of this question. I think it's probably not the kind of gym that he had in mind when Scott Morrison was referring to gyms opening in stage 2. With that said, I was having a think about this the other day about the regular treadmill and dumbbell gyms as well. There's an awful amount of sweating that goes on a gym. There's an awful amount of breathing that goes on in a gym. How can you prevent, gyms, particularly ones with circular air conditioning, from not spreading that as well? I assume what they're saying is at stage 2, the level of transmission in the community is going to be so low, if not at zero, that the risk of passing it, even if you're going through martial arts, or as I like to call it again, intense hugging.
Isn't that what you do when you go camping, Jake?
Somebody's been looking in on my camping trips.
Intense hugging, yay.
Intense hug. Oh, love it. That was great. That was one of the best.
I've been waiting. How long?
I've
been waiting. What are we up to? 35 minutes. I've been waiting 35 minutes for that.
That was a sensational dad joke.
All right, go.
Yeah. Look, I dare say it's, if going to the gym is fine, then going to probably any gym is I assume fine.
Well, except for Gold's Gym, because that's gone, isn't it?
True.
They're gone.
That's true. Yeah.
I signed up for a Gold's Gym once. It was very intimidating. Yeah, it was like 50,000 square meters of just gym.
Yeah, the gorilla pit. I'm a former personal trainer from 100 years ago, and we used to refer to the Gold's Gym and World Gym, and they used to have these great big areas where the big guys with no necks.
Yeah, that was everybody. Everybody but me, of course. Welcome back.
You dropped out.
Welcome back, Jake.
All right, thank you. I just had a bit of a snooze,
all right.
micro sleep, if you will.
We will just pretend like that never happened. So yes, and the big guy. Yeah, okay. So very funny. Lots of excitement about whatever you said was great, and lots of excitement about gyms opening back up. So there you go. There is Jake's response to your question, Julian. Again, if you do have an email or a comment, you can send us that via Facebook or via YouTube, and we do read them because we don't get very many, so that's nice when we do. And yeah, we've read all the ones that we've had out so far. So if you do have a comment or a question, feel free to send that through to us via Facebook, the Pouch the Podcast, or on YouTube, the Pouch the Podcast. And China is...
Can you say it like Donald Trump?
No, I refuse to. I have nightmares about that. You know how people... I can handle nails being rubbed down a chalkboard. Like, I can handle that. I cannot handle the way that Donald Trump says China. I just cannot handle it. It's like having a tooth ripped out and then having someone just scrunch it in front of me and make me eat the little powdery bits that are left of my tooth. That's what it's like. That's how good it is.
I don't know why, Greg, but that makes me very happy.
So, this week I really want to know about our little relationship with China. I'm going through what I feel like is
our little relationship with China.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going through a bit of a cathartic moment with our relationship with China. I was speaking about it with my wife Rachel the other night, and I said, look, is this what happens when you grow up? Like, do you just realize that we do have these dependent relationships with dictator countries, and that's just how it's going to be? I mean, is that just what you do? Do you just go, if we speak out, okay, because let's pretend for a minute that they actually cancelled this trade situation, and we'll get to the details of that. But let's pretend, for example, that they cancelled this trade situation deliberately as an attack on us because we are pushing for this, investigation on coronavirus and its origins, specifically, where it came from in China, and how, whether there was any mishandling of information, whether there was any mistruths put out to the world.
Yeah, its origin and its proliferation.
Well, that's one way of putting it, Jake. There's also a very long-winded version of which I've laid out for you.
I'm normally the one that deals with the long-winded.
Well, I suppose this is real-time me trying to get my thoughts around it, and so I am thinking now. Okay, I don't want them to be ticked off because now we're in a position where people are saying this is going to affect a lot of individuals in the whole of Australia, specifically rural and remote towns are going to be affected by this lack of trade of meat, that then they're going to move on to barley, as in Barley, barley, not the country. I didn't even know we exported barley, but apparently we do. And so they're going to move on to that.
Barley's not a country, by the way.
All right, Jake, fine. Thank you. What is province? Is it a province?
I think so. Of Indonesia, yes.
Do we just call it an island in Indonesia? Anyway, and so okay, so we're but then and there's talk of them moving on to dairy next, like affecting the dairy farmers and that sort of thing. And I think, well, I don't want them to do that, but at the same time, I don't want them to get away with lying to the world. So it's like, well, this is starting to affect me. Maybe not personally, but certainly, as an Australian, looking out for Australian workers and Australian people and feeling this pinch. I don't want this to happen. I don't want people to have to dance around the fact that China's being a bully, But at the same time, if we don't dance around it, we're wrecked, politely.
Yeah, we're bound to dance through it.
Okay.
And this is the very frustrating thing here. I've said this on a previous episode. We could have gone about this in a way that was not so stupidly destructive.
Yeah.
Maybe that's super blunt, but I see a lot of political commentators talking about how Australia, unfortunately jumped on Trump's bandwagon and invariably after
Welcome back. Hello. We're still going. We're going to try and bring all this back. It's very riveting. Jake's frozen. We've lost Skype. All right. We'll come back. We will try and get him back. All right. He's on the call. We're back in. Hey. Anyway, China.
Hooray for NBN.
How good is China? Okay. So
how great is NBN? That's the real question.
So you were saying that. Well, I had finished saying that I was a bit confused, and you said that the interesting part of this was, and then the NBN kicked in.
Yeah. Look. We could have gone about this in a whole lot of a better way. I've talked about this in a previous episode that Australia essentially hitched our wagon to Donald Trump, to America, and invariably Donald Trump and his position on China, which frankly has a great lack of evidence behind that assertion that China did this maliciously, or that China is somehow in inverted commas at fault for the fact that this virus actually happened. A virus happened, it's proliferated. China seemed to have done everything that they possibly could have. Anyway, the fact that we've hitched our wagon to somebody who may not actually be there after November is politically not so savvy. Unfortunately, we've put ourselves in a position where we've, again, hitched our wagon to a political position that is frankly untenable. It is not supported by evidence, and it's inflammatory. Could we have approached this in a better way that would have seen us be able to ask the question of, essentially, we want to find out how this happened and find out how it spread to ensure that if this happens again, when this happens again, that we're able to identify it quickly and, knock it on the head quickly. We're not necessarily saying that China is at fault. Invariably, it did probably all signs point to the fact that it started in China, but invariably they jumped on it quickly. They notified the world quickly. There seem to have been some occasions of, silencing individuals, which, China is invariably a little bit notorious for. But these are the sort of things that we need to understand the process that took place in order to make the coronavirus out to be the essentially the world crippler that it is. We need to understand that so that we can prevent it from occurring again in the future. But we didn't go about it in that way. Instead, we said, what Trump said, essentially, and that makes us effectively as unpopular as Trump. In the eyes of China, and the relations between America and China are freakishly hostile.
Well, and we are very strained as well. There's a lot of commentators who are basically saying that this move. So what did they do this week? They stopped trade, I think, with three of our
three abattoirs.
Three abattoirs, and they're doing it under the guise of
they didn't meet the quarantine measures.
Yeah,
exactly. There are very specific quarantine measures around the the creation of meat, the creation of meat around the killing of animals, the butchering of animals, and the export of their meat.
Yeah.
And apparently these three abattoirs did not follow the formal guidelines. And the thing here is, and of course, I should say, as you said, there's also this notification that there is that this is coinciding with a potential increase in tariffs of 80% to barley imports or exports rather. And the reason, if you want to get into the reason behind that, we have a free trade agreement with China, and free trade agreements essentially are around the premise that the government does not get involved in whatever industry you have free trade around.
Yeah.
So, and the reason for that is if the government injects money into whatever industry that you're exporting in, then essentially the price can be set by the government, and they can, essentially the government then can have a hand in the price that is being exported. They can try to cripple a foreign country, etc. So that's why we have these free trade these things around these free trade agreements. So these are two coincidences, or incidences that have happened, that have coincided together, and it just we've found ourselves asking, while China has essentially said this has nothing to do with the fact that you're calling for this inquiry. This has absolutely nothing to do. This is all procedural stuff.
Yeah.
It's all look, it's got nothing to do with the fact that you have said, China, you've done the wrong thing and we need you to account for it. It has nothing to do with that. It's had everything to do with the procedure.
Yeah. Look, it's so hard, isn't it, to sort of sit back and go, well, you know what? I agree with you, China. I totally think that this is a big coincidence, and that you're not trying to flex your muscles or anything like that. It's very difficult mental hurdle to jump over, isn't it? Because you don't want to be a sucker. No one does.
No.
So how do you tackle that? How do you grapple with that? Because on the one hand, you're sitting there going, well, I don't believe them, but if I don't believe them, then they're kind of evil. If they're kind of evil, then we probably shouldn't be doing all this trade with them. If we don't do trade with them, then we're all stuffed. It's a very difficult thing to do, a very difficult landscape to navigate. I guess surely there's some commentators out there who have been speaking about this for a long time, who have a bit of an exit strategy from a reliance on China. I know there's even talk of some companies, starting to think about at least making some of the smaller components and things in their own countries. But good luck trying to not have any electronics that aren't made in China,
And that is absolutely the thing. So in terms of raw export or import, China accounts for 40% of national trade with Australia.
Yeah.
And that's after you remove all of the stuff that we dig out of the ground, which
flowers.
with that, with the national resources, it's 60%. 60% of our national trade essentially is due to China. So without Chinese trade, we would be in an immediate recession.
Yeah.
Okay. Without a place to send our resources, mines would shut down. They'd probably need to be nationalized in order to retain the resources that we need as a country, to run our power plants, etc. Because otherwise, if we don't nationalize those mines, then there is no way that they would have enough money to pay their workers, etc. Because they got nowhere else to export it. Many farmers, for example, and graziers, they would go bust, and similarly, they may need to be nationalised as well.
Yeah, right.
In order to ensure that we are, maintaining our, food supply, tourism, education. They would be absolutely
Well, they're already
decimated.
being devastated. We've seen the evidence of that now, haven't we? Jake, could we just eat more meat ourselves? Could we just?
Well, I was
could
actually
we just start eating a lot more meat? I mean, I'm ready.
As I was reading the script, I was actually thinking, as I was writing the script, even not reading it, but as I was writing the script, I thought maybe the nationalisation could be a mandate that every human being in Australia must eat at least one steak for every meal.
Yeah.
Now that's not going to work if you've got a broken jaw.
No, that's not going to work if you've got a broken jaw.
No.
Rachel May has asked a question. We're bringing that up on the screen now. What would we want China to do to show that they have accepted or partly accepted responsibility?
I mean, I think they've already showed that they've accepted responsibility, which is they effectively eradicated coronavirus in Wuhan province. I mean, I know that they've had a second wave and they jumped on it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But, look, in the grand scheme of things, I think the way that China dealt with the coronavirus in the very beginning was probably not great, and it was probably a little bit reminiscent of SARS and of SARS. I'll go with SARS, and the fact that in the very beginning we had those. And I'm speaking specifically of the reports of, there was that initial doctor that raised the red flag. We've got this new respiratory illness and we're freaking out about it. I'm seeing a whole bunch of people get really sick and, require ventilation and they're dying soon after. This one doctor is raising red flags. I think he was a ear, nose and throat doctor from memory. It might have been actually an ophthalmologist, an eye doctor. And he raised this alarm. And he was silenced by the government regime. Instances like that are super unfortunate.
Yeah.
And invariably, though, almost immediately coinciding with the proliferation of that individual doctor's message was that China was going to set up something like 6 hospitals, and they did within like 10 days. They set up 6 massive hospitals to take care of the Wuhan population. They locked down Wuhan. The Australian government had to go in there and get our Australian citizens out, and it was a big deal. The other countries had to do the same. So I think, broadly speaking, again, the Chinese government dealt with the coronavirus as they should have.
Yeah.
How can we repair? I mean, maybe that's one of the questions that is important. How can we repair this relationship? I think. I think we just got to ride this out. Maybe we've got to sit in the background and let the EU do what they do, which is be noisy and loud Europeans, speak with their hands a lot and say, hey, coronavirus, you were responsible. Can we get to the bottom of this, please?
Yeah. Let someone else take a bit of the responsibility. Yeah, I suppose maybe there's probably no one right answer. There's probably a lot of wrong answers.
There is. The interesting thing here is, though, on the import side in Australia, we would find it very difficult to get many of, while we might be able to do things like, steak, we might be able to do things like soup. We might be able to do things like, corn and bananas, etc. We would find it very difficult to get a lot of the things that put those things that we make here together. So, like, we can make toilet paper,
yes,
but we can't package it because we import the packaging from China. We could make soup, but we can't put it in tins.
Yeah, we just put it in the back of the truck. You just can't you just hose it straight into
Actually,
into
I love
a container.
That. I love it. It'll just hose it straight into your mouth.
You just have like a big tank of soup that comes to your house and it just comes out, you put it straight into a container.
That actually, I think that's a business.
Exactly.
You've got a business.
We're ideas men, Jake. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm quitting the podcast and starting a soup tank. Truck.
Please don't quit the podcast, Greg. I think the scariest thing is the lack of iPhones that would probably come
absolutely.
from this.
I mean, that's really where this is going, right? Like, we just really want to make sure that we have our iPhones at all times.
Yeah. They're going to cut off the tap. They're going to turn off the tap. They're going to cut us off.
Yeah,
this is not okay. But
no.
We could develop free trade agreements. Let's say tomorrow China cuts us off. They say we're done.
Yep.
We're not doing any more free trade
Probably
with Australia.
Probably going to happen at the rate the news changes when we release the podcast, Jake.
That's true.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But while we could write new free trade agreements with all the countries that we wanted, there is absolutely no way that it would make up for the loss of Chinese trade.
No.
And moreover, the other countries would of course be negotiating from a position of power. So there is a good chance that we would get the raw end of that deal.
Yes.
And of course, those other countries would still be working with China, no doubt, and China still has access to cheap stuff. So we need China.
All right. Well, it'll be
no other way to say it.
It'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. Thank goodness they haven't hired us for any sort of input on this topic, Jake. But what?
I think I would be afraid of just pandering relentlessly.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's what ends up happening. Maybe you get into these jobs with the best of intentions, and then they put you in a room with a Chinese person, and you go, well, hang on, I'm really, making decisions here that are going to affect millions of lives in Australia. Maybe we should just sort of do what they say. And that way, at least the news doesn't look bad tomorrow when everyone's got dinner on their plate.
Just that is a real thing, though. So if you go to China, particularly on a work trip.
Yeah.
On a work trip, and you're liaising with government figures. They may ask you questions about how about the news. Essentially, how do you feel about this particular thing? And invariably, they are looking for weaknesses. They are looking for statements. And
I'm weak, Jake.
Just got to shut up.
I wouldn't be a good ambassador.
I don't have an opinion on that thing. I don't.
Well,
please
I do
take
have
that
an
part
opinion,
out of the
Jake.
podcast.
My heart aches. Jake, thank you so much for chatting with me this week about all things China, all things to do with Virgin Airlines. That's going to be exciting. I hope you guys get a little bit of, I was going to say action, but that's not appropriate for the topic, is it? A little bit of,
Maybe.
I hope something positive comes next week out of the Virgin stuff for you guys, especially considering it's quite a big part of your economy up there.
A portion, certainly.
Yeah, it's a portion. Yeah. It's a portion. Yeah. Jake, when our listeners have finished, contemplating their existential crisis about China, what would you like them to do?
I would like them to do. I got a 3-step plan, Greg, to get us back to productivity. I'd like them to rate. I'd like them to review. And I'd like them to subscribe.
Do it.
That's what I'd like.
Do
Those 3 steps. Rate, review, subscribe.
Rate, review, subscribe. We did get a lot of new subscribers this week from Pete Smithson's podcast, the Aussie English podcast. So welcome to all of those people. You've probably dropped off because our statistics show that most of you only listen to 75% of the show anyway. But anyway, hello to those people who have stuck around. And if you want to share the love, you can tell your friends, families, and foes to head to thepouchthepodcast.com where they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice and subscribe that way. Jake, it's officially the weekend. You can rest your jaw.
It is. Thank you so much.
Can
you see the pain on my face?
Have you got a little pillow for your jaw?
No, I am going to get an ice pack, though.
All right, Jake. I will chat to you again very soon, my friend.
Thank you, listeners.